The grandfather clock in the corner struck midnight, its deep, resonant chime echoing through the vast penthouse like a reminder that time itself was holding its breath. Emma Rose stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her bare feet sinking into the thick carpet while her gaze swept over the city below. The skyline glittered like scattered diamonds. Cars moved like glowing veins of light through streets that seemed impossibly far away from the Connecticut farmland she'd always known. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, steadying herself as her heart hammered against her ribs. 24 years old, and never had she felt so small, so out of place. This wasn't her world. This was Nathan Cross's world. Steel, glass, power, and silence. And somehow, tonight, she had to find a place in it. She heard the door click shut behind her, the faintest sound, but it still made her spine stiffen. His presence filled the room before she turned. Nathan Cross, 35, 6'3", a man whose name carried weight in boardrooms and headlines. He wasn't dressed for business tonight, though. The black pants and white shirt he wore were simple, the top buttons undone as though he had been running his hands through his dark hair in frustration. That hair was slightly messy now, and his gray eyes studied her with an intensity that made her stomach flip. She thought, ridiculously, that he almost looked nervous. But men like Nathan Cross didn't get nervous. They commanded empires. They decided futures. They negotiated billion-dollar deals before breakfast. They didn't falter in front of farm girls who smelled faintly of soap and wildflowers. "You're shaking." His voice was low, rough, the kind of sound that seemed to wrap around her name even when he hadn't said it. Emma turned slowly, her silk nightgown whispering against her legs as she faced him. "I've never—" The words cog, ate in her throat, burning her cheeks. How could she confess to a man like him that she had never been with anyone, that while others her age had chased college parties and city lights, she had been working sunup to sundown to keep her family's farm from collapsing? She swallowed hard, but the truth refused to leave her lips. "I know." Nathan's reply was quiet, almost gentle. He stepped forward, deliberate in each movement, but his eyes held none of the coldness she feared. There was steel there, yes, but softened by something that surprised her: understanding. "Your father made that clear during our negotiations." The word landed between them like a splash of ice water. Negotiations. That was what tonight was supposed to be. Not romance, not fairy tales. Business. He needed a wife to steady his public image. She needed the money to save everything her family had built. Brutal math. A deal sealed with signatures, not vows of love. Her lips trembled as the question escaped before she could stop it. "Are you going to hurt me?" For a heartbeat, something flashed across Nathan's face. Shock, pain, perhaps even guilt. Then his expression softened, and the carefully constructed walls seemed to lower just enough for her to glimpse the man beneath the empire. "No, Emma. Never intentionally." He was close now, close enough for her to breathe in his scent. Expensive cologne, crisp and earthy, like hidden forests and old secrets. When he lifted his hand, she flinched, but his fingers brushed her cheek with a tenderness that unraveled her fear in one fragile thread. "I want you to know something," he said, voice dropping to a whisper as though afraid to break the fragile stillness of the room. "Tonight doesn't have to be about contracts or lawyers or appearances. Tonight can be about us. Just us." The words slipped through her like a spark, igniting something she hadn't dared let herself feel. Us. Such a small word, but in his mouth it sounded enormous, terrifying and breathtaking all at once. Her pulse raced as if the city itself had poured into her veins, and for the first time since she'd stepped into Nathan Cross's world, Emma Rose felt like maybe she belonged to something greater than a deal. And in that suspended moment between midnight and dawn, she realized the promise he had made might just change everything. The silence after his words wrapped itself around Emma like a velvet rope she couldn't escape from. Her heart beat so loud she thought Nathan must hear it. His hand lingered at her cheek, and the warmth of his touch was almost more than she could take. She had expected indifference, the cold edge of a man who saw her as nothing but part of an arrangement. Instead, his gaze was steady, piercing, carrying something she couldn't name but felt all the way down to her bones. Emma tried to step back, but Nathan closed the space between them with ease. The air seemed thinner, charged, as though every breath carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. She had dreamed of love in secret, imagined it in stolen moments with books read under quilted covers. Never like this, never with a man whose name carried power across oceans. When she lifted her eyes again, she found his were darker, stormier, and filled with a hunger he wasn't even trying to hide. Her lips parted before she knew what she was doing. Nathan bent closer, his voice low and rough, almost as if he feared the words themselves. "You're trembling like you're standing at the edge of a cliff, Emma. But all I want is for you to take one step toward me." Emma's knees weakened at his nearness. She felt the pull of him like gravity itself, irresistible and terrifying. She wanted to say something, any thing, but her voice failed. Her silence was an answer all its own. Nathan's jaw tightened as if he were fighting a battle against himself. Then, with a suddenness that stole her breath, he cupped her face with both hands and kissed her. At first, the kiss was gentle, almost questioning. His lips brushed hers like a promise, as if he were giving her one last chance to pull away. But she didn't. Her body betrayed her, leaning into him, surrendering to the fire rising inside her. The control Nathan was famous for cracked like glass. The kiss deepened, no longer tentative but demanding, fierce, alive. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her tight against his chest, and she felt the thunder of his heartbeat hammering as wildly as hers. The city below might as well have disappeared. All that remained was the taste of him, the heat of him, the impossible sense that she was being pulled into a world far more dangerous than contracts and promises. When he finally tore his lips from hers, both of them were breathless. His forehead rested against hers, his voice raw. "You have no idea what you do to me." Emma blinked up at him, seeing something she had never expected. The calm, unshakable man who commanded boardrooms now looked undone, as if her kiss had stripped him bare. Her words came in a whisper, but carried all the power of a storm. "Then, show me." For the first time in her life, Emma wasn't the farm girl who didn't belong. She was a woman standing on the edge of an unknown world, one step away from crossing into something that could either break her or set her free. And with Nathan's eyes locked on hers, she realized there was no turning back. The taste of his kiss still burned on her lips as Emma felt the room tilt, as if the city itself had spun out of orbit. Nathan's grip on her waist was steady but charged with something wild, something barely restrained. She could feel the storm inside him, the one he tried to bury under suits and contracts and control, straining to break free. His eyes locked on hers, gray turning darker with every heartbeat, and she sensed that once this line was crossed, nothing between them would ever be the same. He touched her again, slower this time, his fingertips trailing from her jaw down her throat, leaving a shiver in their wake. Emma's breath caught, her body betraying her with a rush of longing she had no name for. She had read about passion in stolen paperbacks tucked beneath her pillow, but those words had never prepared her for this, for the way every nerve in her body seemed to come alive at his touch. Fear whispered at the edges of her mind, reminding her that this marriage had started as an arrangement, nothing more. But desire drowned that fear, stronger, hungrier, pulling her closer to the man who was both a stranger and the center of her world. Nathan leaned in, his voice a low growl against her ear. "You're not afraid of me, Emma. You're afraid of what you're feeling." Her hands trembled as they pressed against his chest. His heartbeat was strong, unyielding, but beneath it she thought she sensed something fragile, something he didn't want anyone to see. That discovery sent a rush of power through her veins. He wasn't untouchable after all. He was a man, just a man, but one who held the dangerous ability to undo her completely. Emma swallowed hard, lifting her gaze to meet his. "What if you destroy me, Nathan?" His expression faltered, and for a moment she glimpsed pain flicker across his face like lightning behind clouds. Then he answered with words that made Hyung, a breath falter. "Or what if I set you free?" He kissed her again, but this time there was no hesitation. His lips were fierce, claiming, every movement promising things she couldn't even imagine. Emma clung to him, feeling the edges of her old life, the dirt roads, the fields, the endless worry of saving the farm, fall away like dust in the wind. Here, in his arms, she wasn't just a farm girl. She was a woman discovering a part of herself that had been waiting to awaken. When Nathan lifted her, carrying her toward the bedroom, Emma's pulse roared in her ears. The city lights poured through the glass walls, throwing shadows across their entwined bodies. Every step felt like crossing into forbidden territory. She should have been terrified, but the fear was drowned by a dangerous exhilaration that gripped her harder with every heartbeat. He laid her down as if she were made of glass, his hands gentle even as his eyes burned with fire. For a moment he simply looked at her, breathing hard, as though committing her to memory. Then he spoke in a voice roughened by truth he could no longer hide. "You're not part of a deal anymore, Emma. Not tonight. Tonight you're mine." Her answer was not in words, but in the way she reached for him, pulling him down to her with a hunger that surprised them both. She had thought she was stepping into a cage when she married Nathan Cross. Instead, she realized she was opening a door she had never dared to unlock, a door that led to a night capable of changing everything she thought she knew about love, about power, about herself. The first pale light of dawn slipped through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the room where silence hung heavy. Emma lay still, her head against Nathan's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. Her body still hummed with echoes of the night before, every touch, every whispered word replaying in her mind like a secret she was afraid to speak aloud. She had crossed a line she could never step back from, and instead of regret, she felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. Nathan stirred, his arm tightening around her, as though even in sleep he refused to let her go. When his eyes opened, gray and unreadable in the dim light, Emma felt her stomach twist. The powerful businessman was back, the man whose name commanded boardrooms and headlines. But there was something else there too, a softness that didn't belong to Nathan Cross the mogul. It belonged to the man who had whispered promises into her skin as if they were prayers. He studied her in silence, and she shifted nervously under his gaze. Was he already regretting what had happened? Was she about to become nothing more than a mistake? The thought cut deep, sharper than she expected, and she hated how much his answer would matter. Nathan finally spoke, his voice rough from sleep but laced with a vulnerability she had never heard before. "Last night was nothing like what I expected." Her heart stumbled. She forced herself to meet his eyes, searching for meaning. Is that good or bad? He paused, his hand tracing lazy circles against her shoulder, as if grounding himself in her presence. "It's terrifying, and wonderful, and completely unexpected." Emma's breath caught. The words weren't polished or calculated like the statements he delivered to investors or reporters. They were raw, stripped of control, and they wrapped around her heart like chains she wasn't sure she wanted to escape. "Yo, you weren't what I planned for Emma Rose," he admitted quietly. Her pulse raced. "What did you plan for then? Someone who would stand beside you in public but disappear in private. Someone safe." His eyes darkened, but not with anger. With something far more dangerous. "You're the most dangerous thing that's ever happened to me. Because you make me want things I swore I would never want again." Emma felt the weight of his confession, even if she didn't yet understand all the pain behind it. She touched his face gently, her fingers brushing over the sharp line of his jaw. "What things?" For a long moment he didn't answer, and she feared he would retreat back behind the walls he had built so carefully. But then his eyes locked onto hers, unflinching. Love. A real partner. A marriage that isn't about arrangements or contracts, but about what happens when the world is stripped away and only the two of us remain. The word hung between them, fragile and terrifying. Emma's chest tightened. She had never dreamed that Nathan Cross, the man of steel, the untouchable billionaire, would confess something so human, so vulnerable. "What if I told you I already see that man?" she whispered. Nathan searched her face as though torn between disbelief and hope. Then I'd say you're either lying or the bravest woman I've ever met. Emma smiled faintly, courage rising in her chest like fire. I've never been brave before, but something about you makes me want to be. He kissed her slowly, deeply, a kiss that carried no calculation, no deal, no arrangement, only truth. And as the sun broke across the skyline, filling the room with gold, Emma knew they were standing on the edge of something far bigger than either of them had planned, something that could destroy them or save them. The city looked different in the daylight. Emma stood in the corner of Nathan's office, surrounded by glass walls and polished steel, and felt the sharp contrast to the intimacy of their nights together. The air here was colder, heavier, charged with ambition instead of warmth. Nathan sat behind his massive desk, eyes fixed on the contracts spread before him, his jaw tight with concentration. Sunlight caught in his dark hair, but nothing softened the lines of his face. This was not the man who had whispered love against her skin. This was Nathan Cross, the tycoon, wearing his armor again. She had been watching him for too long when his voice broke the silence. "You're staring." Emma flushed, but she didn't look away. She had grown used to the way his words could slice through her like a blade, but this time she stood her ground. "Sorry, I was just thinking." "About what?" He still hadn't lifted his gaze from the papers, but she saw the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth, as if he was curious despite himself. "About how different you are here, stronger, sharper, like you've built walls so high no one could ever climb them." That made him look up. His eyes locked on hers, and the intensity of it made her heart slam against her ribs. He leaned back in his chair, studying her as though she were the most dangerous contract he had ever considered signing. "And how am I when the walls are down?" Emma stepped closer, her voice steady but soft. Real, vulnerable, human. The silence that followed was thick. Then Nathan stood, pushing back his chair with deliberate control, and crossed the room. His movements were smooth, predatory, reminding her of the man who had kissed her until she forgot her own name. He didn't stop until her back was against the cool glass wall, his hands braced on either side of her head, caging her in. "You see too much," he said, his voice low and rough. "Maybe you don't hide enough," she whispered back, surprising herself with her boldness. For a heartbeat, something dangerous flickered in his expression. Desire, yes, but there was more. Fear, anger, need. Emma could feel the weight of it pressing against her like a storm about to break. She thought he might kiss her, right there in his office, with the city spread out behind them and his assistant just outside the door. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. But then, just as quickly, he pulled back. His control snapped into place like a mask, his body retreating though his eyes still burned. "I have a conference call in 5 minutes. His tone was smooth, neutral, the voice of a man who ruled empires without flinching. Emma's heart sank, but she refused to let him see it. She nodded, stepping past him toward the door. Still, she caught the flicker in his eyes as she reached for the handle. Regret, longing, the pieces of the man who had held her so tenderly in the dark. She paused, her hand on the door, and turned back. "Tonight, when you come home, leave the armor here." Nathan didn't answer, but the silence that followed felt like a promise. Emma left the office with her pulse racing, knowing she had thrown a challenge into the heart of a man who had spent his life hiding behind walls of power. And she couldn't shake the feeling that when he came home that night, everything between them might change forever. The penthouse was not the same place Nathan had left that morning. When he stepped inside that evening, loosening his tie as he always did, he was met with the flicker of candlelight dancing across the walls and the scent of something warm and comforting drifting from the kitchen. He froze for a moment, caught off guard, his world of sharp edges and endless schedules colliding with something that felt startlingly human. Emma appeared in the doorway, wearing a simple blue dress, her hair tumbling over her shoulders, her eyes lit by the flames of the candles she had carefully placed. She wasn't draped in diamonds or dressed to impress the cameras. She was real, soft, and breathtaking in a way Nathan hadn't known how to name until now. "What is all this?" he asked, his voice low, guarded but touched with curiosity. "Dinner," she said, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Not catered, not delivered, made with my own hands." Nathan blinked, stunned. "You cooked?" "Don't sound so surprised. Farm girls know their way around a kitchen." She led him to the table she had set with his expensive china, but it didn't look like his world anymore. Wildflowers in a simple vase softened the luxury, cloth napkins folded with care instead of precision, dishes that smelled of herbs and comfort rather than perfection. The sight unsettled him. It felt like someone had opened a window in a locked room he didn't realize he was trapped inside. Emma's eyes met his as he sat down, her voice quiet but steady. "I realized something today, Nathan. We've been living like polite strangers, roommates who happen to share a bed. That's not what I want." His chest tightened, but his walls rose quickly to meet her words. "What's wrong with that?" he asked, though even as the question left his lips, he knew it wasn't what he wanted either. Emma didn't flinch. "Because I'm falling in love with you. Not with your money, not with the power, not with the empire you built. With you. The man who makes me coffee the way I like it. The man who holds me when the nightmares won't let me sleep. The man who promised to drive me crazy and has kept that promise in ways he never expected." Nathan's throat felt tight, his control cracking. He stared at her across the candlelight, and for the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. She moved closer, her hand resting over his on the table. "I know someone hurt you once. I can see it in the way you fight so hard to keep your walls standing. Someone betrayed you, made you believe that love is weakness." Her words pierced straight through him, sharper than any contract clause, deeper than any business rival's blow. He had spent years burying those scars beneath steel and ambition, but somehow Emma saw them as clearly as if he had spoken them aloud. "What if you're wrong?" he whispered, his voice rough. "What if I'm not capable of being the man you think I am?" Emma's smile was gentle but unshakable, her eyes shimmering in the candlelight. "Then I'll wait. I'll be patient. I'll love you enough for both of us until you remember how to love yourself." Something inside Nathan shattered at those words. The careful control, the armor he had polished for decades, crumbled like glass. He leaned across the table and caught her face in his hands, his lips finding hers with a desperation that startled them both. The kiss was not polished or planned. It was raw, a confession poured into the space between them. When he pulled back, his forehead pressed to hers, the words tore from him before he could stop them. "I love you, Emma. God help me. I love you so much it terrifies me." Her breath hitched, tears sliding down her cheeks, but her smile glowed brighter than the candles surrounding them. "Say it again. I love you." The walls were gone now, and Nathan knew they would never return in the same way. He was exposed, vulnerable, but for the first time in years he didn't care, because across that table, with Emma's hand holding his, he realized he hadn't lost anything. He had found everything. The candles had long since burned low, but Nathan sat awake in the dim light, staring at the skyline while Emma slept curled against him. Her words from earlier echoed through his mind, soft but relentless. "I'll love you enough for both of us until you remember how to love yourself." It should have comforted him. Instead, it ripped open scars he had buried so deep he had convinced himself they were gone. He remembered another night years ago, another woman who had whispered promises into his ear. She had sworn loyalty, love, forever. And then she had taken everything she could, his trust, his secrets, even pieces of his company, and sold them to the highest bidder. The humiliation had nearly destroyed him. It was in those ashes he had built his empire. Walls, armor, rules. Never again would he hand anyone the power to break him. Until Emma. The sound of her breathing was steady, peaceful, and he envied it. She trusted him enough to fall asleep in his arms, while every muscle in his body tightened under the weight of doubt. He had told her he loved her, and for a fleeting moment it had felt like freedom. But freedom was dangerous. Freedom came with chains he wasn't sure he could survive if they shattered. When morning came, Emma stirred, smiling at him with sleepy eyes that made his chest ache. "Good morning," she whispered, as if the night before had shifted everything. He kissed her forehead, but his silence made her frown. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan rose from the bed, pulling on his shirt like armor. "Nothing important." She sat up, studying him with quiet intensity. "You're lying. I can, see it." Her words struck like a challenge, and he turned, his jaw hard. "You see too much." "Maybe you hide too much," she answered softly, refusing to retreat. The air between them crackled with unspoken truths, and Nathan felt the storm inside him raging. He wanted to tell her everything, to pour out the poison of his past, but the fear of losing her was stronger. If she knew the depths of his brokenness, would she still look at him with those fearless eyes? That evening, Emma found him in his office, his hands clenched on the edge of his desk, his eyes shadowed. She crossed the room quietly, placing her hand over his. Nathan flinched at the touch, but didn't pull away. "Talk to me," she urged. "Whatever it is, let me carry it with you." His laugh was sharp, bitter. "You don't know what you're asking for. If you step into this, Emma, you're stepping into a world that will chew you up and spit you out." Her hand tightened over his, her voice steady. "Then I'll step in anyway, because you're already in my world, and it's not power or money or walls, it's love. That's the only world I live in." Something broke in him then. He pulled her against him, his lips crushing hers in a kiss that was all desperation and fear and hunger tangled into one. When he finally pulled away, his voice cracked. "I can't lose you." "You won't," she said with unshakable certainty, "unless you push me away." Her words hung between them like a blade, and Nathan realized she had cornered him in a way no rival ever had. The truth was simple and terrifying. If he didn't let her in fully, he would lose her anyway, and that was a risk even he wasn't strong enough to take. Rain lashed against the glass walls of the penthouse that night, a storm sweeping through the city as if it mirrored the one building inside Nathan. He stood by the window, his silhouette outlined by flashes of lightning, his shoulders tense as though he were bracing against an invisible attack. Emma watched him from across the room, her heart heavy with the distance he had built between them since their last confrontation. He had said he couldn't lose her, yet he kept pulling away, hiding pieces of himself as if she were a threat instead of the one person who wanted only to understand. Finally, unable to stand the silence, Emma crossed the room. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "Nathan, look at me." He didn't move at first, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the storm. Then, slowly, he turned, and in his face she saw not the untouchable billionaire the world admired, but a man haunted by shadows. His voice was low, almost broken. "You want the truth, Emma? The truth is I've spent years building walls so high even I can't see over them. And every time you look at me like you do, every time you touch me, I feel them cracking, and that terrifies me." Emma's throat tightened, but she stepped closer. "What are you so afraid I'll find on the other side of those walls?" Nathan's laugh was bitter, hollow, a man who trusted the wrong person, a man who once believed love could survive anything and learned the hard way it can be bought, sold, and used like a weapon. She promised forever, and while I was blind with faith, she emptied my world and left me in ruins. That's the man behind the walls, broken, cautious, cold. Emma reached up, touching his cheek, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You're not broken, Nathan. You're scarred, and scars don't make you weaker. They prove you survived." Something in him snapped. He pulled her into his arms with a force that stole her breath, his mouth crashing against hers in a kiss raw with need and despair. The storm outside raged, thunder rolling like a drumbeat to the fire between them. His hands roamed her body, not with the careful restraint of their first night, but with the hunger of a man finally surrendering to what he had denied for too long. Emma clung to him, giving back everything he poured into her, her faith, her tenderness, her love. She whispered against his lips, "You don't have to be afraid anymore. Not with me." He froze for a heartbeat, her words sinking deep, then kissed her harder, as if he were drowning and she was the only air he had left. They fell into each other with no walls, no masks, no negotiations, only raw, unguarded truth. For the first time in years, Nathan let himself be seen. He told her about the loneliness that had driven him to build his empire, about the nights he lay awake convinced that success would never be enough, about the boy he once was, who dreamed of love before the world taught him that dreams were luxuries. Emma listened with tears streaming down her face, holding him as though her arms could shield him from the ghosts of his past. And when his voice faltered, when the weight of his confession threatened to crush him, she whispered the words that anchored him. "You're not alone anymore." As the storm broke outside, Nathan surrendered fully, body and soul, giving her the pieces of himself no one else had ever touched. And Emma, with her quiet strength and unshakable heart, caught every piece and held it as though it were treasure. By the time dawn painted the sky in pale gold, Nathan knew the truth he had spent years denying. Emma wasn't his weakness. She was his salvation. The morning after the storm, the city sparkled under a sky scrubbed clean, but inside Nathan's penthouse, the air felt heavier than it had ever been. Emma stood by the dining table, running her fingers over the smooth surface as if searching for courage in the grain of the wood. Nathan was at the window again, staring down at the streets far below with the rigid posture of a man preparing for battle. His suit was perfect, his tie knotted, the armor back in place. Yet Emma could feel the difference. The night before had stripped something away, and even now, beneath the polished exterior, the man she had held through the storm still lingered. She spoke first, her voice steady, though her heart pounded. "Nathan, are we still pretending this is just an arrangement?" He turned slowly, his eyes unreadable. For a moment she feared he would retreat again, bury himself in silence. But then his hand tightened into a fist at his side, and he crossed the room with sudden purpose. He stopped inches from her, his gaze burning into hers. "No, we're not." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" He reached for her face, cupping it gently in his hands, and his words came like fire breaking through ice. "This arrangement is over. Finished. I don't want a wife on paper, Emma. I don't want a partner who plays the part in public but vanishes in private. I want you, all of you, every stubborn, fearless, impossible part of you." Emma's chest tightened, a rush of emotion stealing her breath. She had dreamed of hearing those words, but the way he said them, fierce and raw, made them more terrifying than she imagined, because now it wasn't just about surviving, it was about risking everything. "And what does that mean for us?" she whispered. Nathan's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "It means there will be consequences. People will question us. They'll call you a gold digger, a farm girl who trapped, a billionaire. My rivals will dig into your past, your family, anything they can use to hurt us. Choosing you means declaring war on the world I've spent my life building." Emma's heart hammered. "And you're still willing to do it?" His thumb brushed across her cheek, his voice low but certain. "I don't care about the world anymore. I care about you." Before she could answer, his phone rang on the table, the sharp sound slicing through the moment. He ignored it, his eyes never leaving hers, but Emma couldn't shake the unease crawling up her spine. There was more at stake here than either of them wanted to admit. Nathan kissed her then, slow and deliberate, as though sealing his declaration with something no one could take from them. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, his voice rough. "From this day forward, there are no contracts, no negotiations, no masks. Just us." Emma's lips trembled into a smile, tears blurring her vision. "Then I choose us too." For the first time, Nathan felt the weight of freedom instead of fear. But in the silence that followed, with the phone still buzzing insistently on the table, a shadow lingered. Emma could feel it. He had chosen her, yes, but the world outside their walls was already preparing to test them. The call Nathan ignored that morning was only the beginning. By afternoon, whispers had begun to ripple through the business world like cracks spreading through glass. Emma saw it in the way his assistants moved faster than usual, hushed conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room, the tension radiating from Nathan's shoulders, though he tried to keep his mask firmly in place. Something was coming, and it was coming for them. That evening, when the headlines hit, Emma's worst fears materialized. Photos of her at the farm, grainy and cruel, splashed across the news with captions that questioned her worth. Stories twisted the truth of their marriage, painting her as a schemer who had trapped the billionaire in a calculated move. Words like gold digger and scandal clung to her name like poison. Emma's hands shook as she stared at the glowing screen, her stomach twisting. Nathan found her in the living room, her face pale as she read the venom dripping from the reports. She lifted her eyes to him, searching for reassurance, but all she saw was fury carved into every line of his face. "They're trying to destroy you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No," Nathan growled, his jaw tight. "They're trying to destroy us." For the first time since their marriage, Emma saw him not as a businessman controlling empires, but as a man fighting for something far more fragile, her. He pulled her close, his arms tightening as if daring the world to tear her from him. "I told you there would be consequences," he said, his voice low but filled with a promise that made her heart ache. "What I didn't tell you is that I'd burn down everything I've built before I'd let them take you away from me." Emma felt tears sting her eyes, but she lifted her chin, steady despite the storm raging around them. "Then, let's face them together, because if this love isn't strong enough to survive, and it isn't real." Nathan kissed her, fierce and unyielding, as though sealing a pact written not in ink but in blood and fire. And when he pulled away, his gray eyes gleamed with something sharper than steel. "Let them come. Let them call it scandal. Let them question everything. I don't care. I'll stand in front of the world and tell them exactly what this is." And he did. The next day, standing before cameras and flashing lights, Nathan Cross, the man who had once guarded his heart behind walls higher than his skyscrapers, looked at Emma with the world watching and said the words that left even his enemies stunned. "This marriage didn't start as love, but it became love, the kind of love I thought I'd never find again. She is not my weakness. She is my strength. She is my wife, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that to her, not to any of you." Gasps echoed, questions flew, but Nathan didn't care. He turned from the microphones and took Emma's hand, the cameras capturing the unshakable way he held her, as though daring anyone to try and pull her away. Later, when the chaos faded and they stood alone on the balcony of the penthouse, Emma pressed against him, her head resting on his chest. The city glowed beneath them, endless and bright. But for once Nathan wasn't looking at it. He was looking at her. "You're still dangerous to me," he murmured, his lips brushing her hair. Emma smiled through the tears that clung to her lashes. "Then it's too late for you, Nathan Cross, because you're mine now." He kissed her with the certainty of a man who had fought his demons and chosen his future. Their love had begun as an arrangement, a contract born of desperation, but it had become something no one could have predicted, a bond that defied betrayal, scandal, and fear. As the night wrapped around them and the city pulsed like a living thing, Emma and Nathan knew the truth. The world could call it what it wanted, but for them, it was the only thing that mattered. Love not written in contracts or bound by negotiations. Love reborn in fire, stronger than scandal, deeper than fear. And for the rest of their lives, they would live the promise of that first night together, when he had sworn to drive her crazy, and she had discovered a love beyond imagination,